After seeing the Clone Wars and after reading Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir, I didn't think anyone would be able to do a decent Darth Maul story. I think the reason for that is the people who write his character quite simply don't get him, and as such, they just don't play to his strengths, which always results in mediocre stories about him. While the new Darth Maul comic from Marvel isn't perfect, it's a step in the right direction for the character, and it's one of the better stories I've read about him, and it's certainly better than anything from the TV show. Darth Maul is set sometime before the Phantom Menace, and it sees Darth Maul hunting Jedi against his master's orders, for some reason with a group of bounty hunters. I liked the fact that Maul was hunting a Jedi, and it reminded me of the now Legends book Darth Maul Shadowhunter. Darth Maul puts a different spin on it though, because where Sidious had faith in Maul in Shadowhunter and told him to track down Hath Monchar and kill the Jedi guarding him, in this comic it's made clear that Sidious doesn't want Maul connecting with the Jedi at all, even if he kills all the witnesses. I'm not really sure why Aurra Sing, Cad Bane and that rat thing are in the comic, and I wish they weren't, because it feels like they were included purely for fan service, because for 90% of the story I found them to be completely irrelevant, and I also think Maul is a character that does well on his own, and it's where he shines the most. With that and the fact that Maul constantly has this inner monologue going on throughout the entire comic that explores his training and history with Sidious, as well as his rage against the Jedi, I can't help but think a solo outing for Maul would have been a much more intimate and interesting story. I think writer Cullen Bunn was so close to having a perfect Maul story, and it comes across to me as if the bounty hunters were added because the kids like them, and it's a real shame because they are the only thing that brings this comic down. It's not that they're particularly bad or anything, it's just that any time the attention is on them, it's not on Maul, and I really feel like that's the way it should have been. It's especially worse reading a story about Maul before episode 1 where he's working with Aurra Sing, because in Legends she was force sensitive and had a lightsaber, and that could have led to an awesome three-way duel where Aurra Sing barely left with her life and somehow ended up at Mos Espa during the Boonta Eve Classic. Sadly, George Lucas shat all over that, so she's not force sensitive anymore, but that would have tied right in with episode 1 and been a good standalone story. I liked Zevs Rexus, or however you say her name. The combination of her character being an underground facilitator of all things illegal and the artwork really reminded me of Max from the first Mission Impossible film. She even has a similar hairstyle and seems to be a similar age. I have no idea if the similarities were put in there on purpose, but either way I liked them. There are also some good references in Darth Maul, such as Maul's memory of visiting Malachor with Darth Sidious, Gracchus the Hutt makes an appearance, and even the Outrider pops up. I don't like what they did with the Outrider in Rebels, removing its connection to Dash Rendar in favour of having a bunch of kids own it, but it's still nice to see the ship again. I liked the art. I don't think it was as good as in Kanan or Star Wars Volume 1, but it's still very good, and it's a hell of a lot better than the art in Son of Dathomir. Luke Ross did the pencils and Nolan Woodard did the colouring, and they work well together. There are some excellent panels throughout the book, but my favourite are the close-ups of Maul's face. Sometimes it's a blown-up close-up that takes up a quarter of a page, but other times it can just be a close-up of the bottom half of Maul's face, and the amount of expression just shown through his mouth, whether he's smiling, has his mouth closed because he's thinking, or has his teeth barred ready for a fight, is really good and often very reminiscent of the final fight in episode 1. I can't even remember the last time I read a Darth Maul comic where his head didn't just look like a balloon with a face painted on it. Too often he's drawn so his head changes shape for some reason, but Ross did an excellent job paying enough attention to actually drawing cheekbones and facial features that all too often get forgotten about with Maul, and Woodard has had the good sense not to automatically colour the blacks and reds of Maul's face in too strongly, which has preserved the effort Ross put in. The combination of Ross's pencils and Woodard's colours mean we actually get a Darth Maul that looks like Ray Park's Maul, and not just some random guy with the same red and black patterns on his face, which I think happens to Maul quite a lot in the comics. It's not a photorealistic comic by any means, but those touches just make it seem so much more enjoyable. There's also a shitty little short story in the back about one of Maul's probe droids from episode 1, and just like the comic stuffed in at the end of the Darth Vader omnibus, it's a crap story with crap artwork. It was included in the first individual issue when it was released, so I understand why it was included in this trade, but I can't help feeling like it simply shouldn't exist in the first place. As Kevin Smith would say, it's shit that should not be, and only serves to highlight how stupid, simple, and untalented Chris Eliopoulos really is. There's a variant cover for each issue throughout the book, and the back of the book has one page which has 2 more variant covers on it, some adverts and stuff, all the same ads that the other Marvel trades had in them, and no artwork at all, so definitely nothing special at all. I've got 4 or 5 of the new trades now, and I've noticed that just like the hardcovers that have dust jackets, they all match up on my bookshelf, which is pretty cool, although I think all that red and black is going to get pretty boring eventually. I do miss the white of the Clone Wars, Tales and Omnibus trades in Legends. I think Darth Maul should have his own run of comics set before episode 1. Not a 5-issue arc, which makes it difficult to go into much depth and development, although they did well here, but a full ongoing comic like Vader. In the first run of the Vader comics, we had Vader working for the Emperor, while also seeing him do his own thing with Dr. Aphra and the droids behind the Emperor's back. I see no reason why a 12 or 24 issue series of Darth Maul wouldn't work equally as well. He could be working for Sidious, helping to manipulate Sidious's various investments, and co-conspirators line things up ready for the blockade of Naboo and possibly even other planets, while at the same time working behind his back hunting Jedi. This is a 5-issue comic, but if you add in the Legends stories Shadowhunter and Lockdown, I think there would be at least 15 issues there, and they could easily add more. And the thing is, they wouldn't have to do each story one by one, they could overlap them and integrate them into each other, just like they did with Vader. I'm not saying they should actually use Shadowhunter and Lockdown, they're just examples of stuff you could have in a full run of Maul comics, and with the inner monologue Bunn has given him, combined with the care Ross and Woodard have taken on the art, I think that would make a great run of comics. Overall, I think Darth Maul is worth reading. In the new canon, it's probably the only decent Maul story, and while it's not as good as the original Darth Maul comic from 2000, Cullen Bunn did a good job making Maul come across as a lone wolf, and an incredibly vicious, impatient and angry one at that, and Ross and Woodard did a good job with the art, especially with Maul himself. It's nice to see someone try to give Maul the comic he deserves, and while it wasn't the solo adventure I think it should have been, it's still pretty good. So I still think the original Maul comic is better, but if you want to read a canon Darth Maul comic, you could do a lot worse than this.